Welcome, and welcome back. Welcome to the 19th episode. Welcome back to Skåne. This time, the episode will be centered around the southern part of the region, and more specifically, Malmö-Ystad's railway, MYJ. So as we slowly roll out of the roundhouse and into Ystad station, it's a kind of weird one actually, to start the journey to Malmö. Ystad station was originally built as a terminus station on the Ystad-Eslöv railway, with only access from the east and opened in 1865. When Malmö-Ystad railway opened in 1874, a wiggly backdoor entrance, so to say, was implemented to enable traffic also going to the west. And this workaround is still there today, almost 150 years later, even though the eastern connection has been partly removed. Parts of it is still remaining, going towards Tomelilla. The cab ride on Ystad-Eslöv's railway can be seen in episode 15th, by the way. It starts roughly 30 minutes into that episode. As we leave Ystad, this large port area, and soon almost rejoin the harbour railway on the left, over here, and the climb up to the southern plain, Söderslätt, is about to start. The southern plain is in Skåne is Sweden's breadbasket. Good and fertile soils, and from a Scandinavian perspective, a decent climate. If you look to the left, you can in the distance over there see a small tower, and that is Charlottenlund Castle. Count Arvid Posse had that castle built in 1849. Posse was a great railway enthusiast. Not only did he serve on the board of Malmö-Ystad railway, he even had a small branch line constructed from Charlottenlund station to the castle. You can see it here on the left. He was also a member of parliament, 1856 to 1890, and Prime Minister of Sweden for 3 years in the 1880s. The planning for Malmö-Ystad railway started as early as 1866 on the initiative from Count Corfitz-Beck Fries. It was quite clear already from the start that the state would not grant any funds for the construction of this railway, and that local investments had to be fund the full cost. And as we left the station on board the locomotive Wemmenhög, we had a meeting with the local freight train headed by the locomotive called Bara, both of them named after jurisdictions in the area, Härad in Swedish. The tracks leaving to the left here is the future Ystad-Skivarps railway. The city of Ystad was not the slightest interested in investing in this project, as it had already the preferred railway connection at Eslöv and was afraid that Malmö would gain market shares from Ystad harbour. The first draft for Malmö-Ystad railway was to build using standard gauge 1435mm, and on the right there we had Marsvinsholm Castle. But the surveys found that too expensive, and 2 suggestions were made, and both were scrapped as the costs were considered too high, and further investigations had to be made. The next draft presented a railway with an even lower standard, but the costs were still considered too high, and again more investigations had to be carried out. Marsvinsholm Castle, that we just passed, was built in 1848 by Otto Marsvin, who named it after himself. The estate then passed through no less than 9 different noble families before it was purchased by Baron Jules Stjernblad in 1854. Stjernblad was a member of parliament from 1850 to 77 and on the board for Malmö East Railway, of course. The lands and the church with the same name play a role in some Wallander books. As we gain speed after leaving Marsvinholm station, we just passed Ringe Castle. Ringe Manor was broken out from Marsvinholm estate in the 18th century, and Ringe Castle was built in 1860 by Baron Arvid Kurk. He was one of the few nobles in the area that wasn't involved in building the railway, and the castle was demolished in the 1970s. And we are now approaching Rydsgård station. The track that came in from the left is the future Trelleborg-Rydsgård railway. And as we leave Rydsgård station, we are slightly held up as we are going to meet the East Coast passenger train headed by locomotive Ljunitz, also named after a jurisdiction or Härad on the line. After declining the plan for the railway in 1869, a third surveyor was assigned to the task. His suggestion costed half of the 1866 suggestion. It was an 891mm narrow gauge line with unusually light rails that would only allow very light engines and wagons and very low speed. A plan to build a branch line from Skabersjö to Trelleborg was also suggested. This suggestion was scrapped as well in 1871. Yet another survey for the line was started in 1872. This one including building separate stations in both Malmö and Ystad and to build a railway with Blekinge gauge 1067mm and very light rails, of course. The temporary board approved the idea and decided to formally establish a limited company to carry out the building of the railway. A concession for a standard gauge railway was requested, but with the reservation that the line would be built narrow gauge 1067mm if not enough funds could be raised. The concession request also included a branch line from Börringe to Anderslöv. And we are now approaching Skurup station. A few kilometers north of the station is another castle that played a role in the creation of this railway. Svaneholm Castle was built by Moritz Jepsen Sparre in the early 16th century, inherited in the late 18th century by Sweden's most important agricultural reformer Rutger Maclean, and in 1874 owned by the Hallenborg family. Magnus Hallenborg, or his full name Oliver Magnus Fredrik Carl Wilhelm Hallenborg, was member of parliament from 1867 until his death in 1892 and a member of the board in Malmö Ystad Railway. As not enough funds had been raised when the concession was given by the state, the board decided after a long argument to use the narrow gauge option. Baron Stjernfeld immediately left the board. An updated concession request was sent to the state to get the narrow gauge option approved, but before the approval, Baron Stjernfeld approached the board offering to invest half of the additional funds needed if the board would approve a standard gauge railway. This was approved and he re-entered the board, building to. In a second, we are passing Näsbyholm Castle on the left. Näsbyholm was originally built by Archbishop Birger Gunnarsson in the 15th century. Much of the old castle was demolished in the 1850s, and the Baron of Näsbyholm at the time, Carl von Blixen-Finnicke, played no major role in the railway project. He was a member of parliament in both Sweden and Denmark for a while, foreign minister in Denmark and brother-in-law to the later Danish king Christian IX. Carl von Blixen-Finnicke had studied together with the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck and made a desperate and fruitless attempt of private diplomacy to stop the Second Schleswig War in the 1860s. The next station we are approaching is Börringe, and the line coming in from the left is the future Börringe-Anderslöv railway, later extended into Börringe Östratorps railway. And as we get into the station, on the right side in front of the station or after the station is the next castle, Börringe Kloster. It was originally built as a Benedictine monastery in the early 13th century. It was partly demolished and rebuilt after the Reformation and transformed into a castle. And again in the mid-18th century, after the Beck-Fries family took possession of it, it lost its defensive pieces. Count Corfitz Beck-Fries was the leading figure behind the Malmö-Ystad railway project and served as chairman of the board from the fundraising through the building and into the traffic phase for the railway company. He was also member of parliament from 1850 to 84 and a promoter of the harbour in Trelleborg, where at least one street bears his name. And as we pass over Segeå, that is the same small river that the southern main line passed just north of Malmö station, there will actually be another 3 railway crossings of this small river, so Segeå will be mentioned again. One of Skåne's first towns was Trelleborg. It is believed to have Viking origins and was given name to the distinct Viking ring fortresses that are known as Trelleborgs. It lost its trading rights in 1619 and devolved into a larger village. The increase in trade all over Northern Europe after the Napoleon Wars and the start of the Industrial Revolution meant a comeback. The next station is Svedala, with the line from Lund to Trelleborg, set to open a year after this, will cross the Malmö-Ystad railway. So you could see it coming from the right and you will see it in front of you going out to the left. Svedala eventually grew into a small town of its own as it connected 4 cities. It was on decent distance from all of them, and the lands around the station was owned by free peasants and not locked into an estate, which meant land could be sold off for building houses, factories, shops, whatever else. The building of the line eventually started in 1873, and 20 months later, on December 16, 1874, the line opened for 3,393,335 Swedish krona. A 63-kilometer long railway with light, but not very light, rail was built, 4 locomotives and 94 wagons purchased, and plenty of countryside got connected. During the building, an agreement was struck with Ystad-Islev Railway to enable the use of their station, removing the need for a second station in Ystad. The line isn't following the shortest good path between Malmö and Ystad. It did have a few estates that it needed to connect on the way. Had it not been for the Baron Stjernblad privately funding half the extra cost for building a standard gauge, this railway will probably not have survived until today, but it's still there today. We just passed Skabersjö, tiny village with an important castle. The 1871 plans for Malmö-Ystad railway contain a branch line from here, from Skabersjö to Trelleborg, but instead Lund-Trelleborg railway would build the link at Svedala that we just passed. The origins of Skabersjö castle, that will come up on the right side, just after the trees here. A tiny village with an important castle. Sorry, the origins is somewhat unclear, but the well on the courtyard is dated to around the year 1000, so Viking times. There was a fortified manor here in the 13th century after King, you can see it here now, after King Christian II, known as Christian the Good in Denmark and Christian the Tyrant in Sweden, had been deposed in 1523. Malmö was sieged by armies loyal to different nobles with headquarters at Skabersjö. After the fall of Malmö, the citizens revenged by burning Skabersjö castle to the grounds. The current castle is mainly 18th century. Count Otto Tott was the owner of Skabersjö in 1874, Lord Chamberlain and member of the board of Malmö Ystad Railway, of course. Another noble member of the board not mentioned is Gottschalk von Geyer, deputy chairman of the board and CEO for the company in the 1870s. Military officer, also Lord Chamberlain, and member of parliament, of course. As we leave Oxie station, the center for Oxie jurisdiction in Härad, with a 12th century church, believed to be Malmö's oldest building. You have Kristineberg Manor there on the left. We have now entered today's Malmö, but there are still many fields to pass before reaching the Malmö of 1874. Other members of the board were Consul Hans Fries. He was a wine merchant in Malmö and vice consul representing the Empire of Brazil in Malmö. Estate owner P. Kockum. The Kockum family was Malmö's leading industrialist family, but I can't find out who P is, because I can't find him in any lists. And the last member was Wilhelm Luttrop. He was a merchant, and he was still on the board in 1905, so he was a long-serving member. From Malmö Ystad's railway staff list in 1905, there were 9 board members, 3 deputy board members, 45 management and administration, 35 line guards, including line masters, 36 engineers, stokers, onboard staff, maintenance and repair staff, 40 station workers, 4 others, in total, excluding the board, 160 people employed. That's a lot of people. So we just passed under the railway bank of the future Malmö Continental Railway to Trelleborg. That is still in use, and a very distinct feature in a rather flat city. However, the railway will not be realized for years yet. It is only put in to get Malmö behind it, so to say, to get a good setup in the game. We are now heading into Malmö Söder van station. The future line from Trelleborg is coming in on the left. That's the Malmö Trelleborg railway, but the lines are separated to block the other line as little as possible as a single track. As this is a single track heaven, no railways in Sweden were built double tracked. Some were later duplicated though. Malmö Ystad railway, known as the Ystad line, has never been duplicated, so to keep traffic flowing there is still a need of some planning. Malmö Ystad railway would eventually in the 1970s be connected to Malmö's Continental Railway that we just passed under and brought into the city that way, moved over to Malmö Central Station and Malmö West with its numerous street crossings was removed. But in 1874 the Malmö Ystad railway had its end station at Malmö West, and we are approaching it, separated from Malmö Central by the Harbour Canal and a street. A connection was built to connect the 2 stations. The station on the left, as we get into the station here, is the local line Malmö-Limhamn that will also be opened in the future. So this was the story of Malmö Ystad Railway, or the Baron's Line as public called it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again, and sorry for speaking very quickly this time.